Good evening, boys and girls. Are you ready for bed? Are you ready for a bedtime story? You don't have to be in bed or even tired, and the lights don't even have to be out. But tonight, I've put together my stories about Shirley, the one that got shipwrecked and lived on the island with a parrot and a sheep. I think there's 5 stories in this one. It's really good, and I've just combined all the ones. I do plan to make a fresh recording so it's nice to listen to, but I just stuck them all together so that you'd have a nice story from start to end. I recorded this to my little girls, 1 story each night for a full week. Hope you enjoy. Remember to hit subscribe or like, share with a friend who needs a story. Let's enjoy. Good evening, my little girls, my little princesses, and my little angels. I hope you're all tucked up nice and tightly in bed with the lights out, because today is a new story, a special new story just for you two. And I've thought about this story and about the new character for quite a long time, and I think I have found a very good one. I thought about Pippi and Shirley and all the other characters in the books that we've read and the princesses. And I want to tell you about this girl. I think she's been in one of the stories before, and she just happened to be there by mistake. She was the girl that was the story between the princess and the story of Shirley, and for some reason she came into life as Princess Shirley. And so this is the story. This is the real story of Princess Shirley. It's quite sad and scary and happy and all kinds of things, and you might hear bits and pieces from other stories. And now that's the magic of telling stories, is because you can put all the pieces from different stories and mix them together and make your own story, just like growing up and life itself. And so this story begins on a ship. So you see, Shirley was a princess, and so Shirley's mommy and daddy were a king and queen. And this little princess did not have any little brothers or sisters, so she was the only child, the only heir to the throne, the only little girl who could become the queen when her mom and dad died. And because of this, the king of another country, the bad king, wanted to steal the king Shirley's father's castle and land and gold. And so for 5 years Shirley was in hiding in the castle, and her father and mother were trying to protect her from all the terrible things that were sent to try and catch her or kill her or take her father away or steal the gold. Or you see, this terrible, terrible king from this very terrible country was very greedy, and he stopped at nothing to try and get the gold and the country that belonged to Shirley's mommy and daddy, the king and the queen. And so for 5 years, Shirley did not have a very nice life. She was always stuck in the tower, almost like a princess who was being kept there by a bad mommy and daddy. But she didn't have a bad mommy and daddy. Her mom and dad were so kind and wonderful. And if they did not have to protect her from the bad king, of course they would have bought her a horse and let her play outside and eat whatever she wanted and have lots of birthdays if she wanted and do anything she wanted, because she was the princess, the only daughter, the only girl that would become the queen of this country, and her mummy and daddy loved her. But unfortunately, even though her parents loved her so much, they had to protect her from the evil king. And so she was kept inside for 5 years. Now during these 5 years, and because her mum and dad loved her so much, they got so sad because they couldn't let her play outside that they decided, having seen the country that they are the king and queen of getting smaller and smaller because the bad king was taking all the land, they decided that they would have to escape. And so to escape a country, if you're the king and the queen, it's not as easy as jumping on a plane. It's not as easy as just getting in the car and driving away. Kings and queens cannot just do that because they have a castle with lots of people that work there, and they have all this treasure and gold that they hold on to for the people. And they've got their own gold, and they've got all the clothes, and you cannot imagine what things a princess and king and queen have. And in that time, there weren't any airplanes, and there weren't any cars. The only thing you had to do was pack it all into big, big boxes and get lots of people to carry them all the way to the sea, and even get on some horses and maybe an elephant if that's the kind of country you lived in. Take some animals and take as much as you can, because you can't come back if you're giving up your country to a bad king. And so they packed for weeks and weeks and weeks. They got the boxes made by the carpenters who built them all to fit the things. And they got all the people together, and they had to take all the food as well for all these people, you see, because they were going on a ship and they were going to sail to a better place. Shirley's dad, the king, had a brother who was the king of another country. And so, after weeks of trying to organize a safe place, they finally got word from the nice king that they could come to his land. And so it was almost time, and Shirley was so pleased to be going to a place where she could play outside. But she had to get there first. And it was a very dangerous trip. First they had to escape the castle, and then they had to get to the sea, and then they had to get onto the boat and sail over the seas, try to escape from the pirates, and then get to the land where the brother, the king of the good country, lived. They decided that they would escape at night time, because the bad king and his men would be sleeping, and it would be very easy to go at night. They had to travel for several hours to get to the ship, and they thought they would set off at about 1 o'clock in the morning. The king and the queen and the princess could not sleep at all the night before, and so even though they were very tired, they rounded up the people, the workers, the cooks, the cleaners, the helpers, the bodyguards, and food for all these people. That's right, they had to bring all the food for enough people to last for 2 months, because it would take about that much time to travel all the way to the new king's land. Now, of course, they couldn't pack so much rice and meat and vegetables, so they had to bring some animals, and they had to bring some plants as well, so that they could keep them on the ship. They brought along a few sheep, some pigs, a cow for the milk, and some flowers and plants and stuff like that. Shirley got to bring her favourite toy, a little parrot named Master. So, it was time to go. It was black, pitch black, and so dark and scary, but they tried to be as quiet as possible as they loaded everything onto the carriages and rode the horses and marched the men all the way down to the sea as quietly as they could. Shirley could see the moonlight shining on the surface of the water and the huge ship that she'd only seen and heard about in stories from her daddy. They boarded the ship, which took quite a long time because they had to go over a narrow, thin, wooden plank across the gap between the land and the sea and the ship, and they had to go one by one. Finally, they were on the ship, and they were setting sail for their new home. Shirley was quite surprised that it happened so uneventfully, and that means that she got from her castle to the ship, and now she's on the water sailing to her uncle's house, and she didn't see a bad guy anywhere. So she asked her daddy, "Where are all these bad people that kept me in the tower for 5 years?" And he turned her around and pointed over to the other side of the bay, where she saw the flames and the fire of the bad army burning down the castle where she used to live. Do you see that, my child? We would have been in that castle on fire if we had not escaped tonight. The fire grew so hot that they could feel the warmth on their cheeks. Shirley's daddy gave her a big hug and told her that she was going to be okay now, and they're going to their uncle's house where there'll be no bad kings and no bad guys trying to burn down their castle. "Will there be any dragons?" said Shirley. "Not at all. No dragons or anything like that. Can I play outside? Can I ride my bike? Can I have a pet dog? And even a horse? You can have anything you want, my little princess." And so Shirley was put down and went to sleep. The boat was rocking quite gently, which gave her a nice bit of sleep, and she had the most wonderful dream, although the dream sometimes got a bit scary. The next day, she woke up, and her daddy had made her a nice hot cup of tea, and all the people were getting used to the new ship and talking about the new land and trying to give each other all the jobs that they had to do on the ship. Even Shirley, even the king and the queen had to help, because this was not a trip like a holiday, and it was not a trip of luxury where the king and queen sat there and the servants and everybody gave them food and gave them a foot massage and made them feel nice and special. They were not kings and queens anymore because their castle was burnt down and their land was gone. So even though they were kings and queens, on this ship they had to help out, and they had to help with their hands and their skills and whatever they could do. They were part of the team now, not the boss of the team. And although they still spoke like they were kings and queens, and even though the cleaners and the cooks and the chefs and everybody still knew that they were kings and queens in the past, and so they had a lot of respect for them. They all worked together as one team, and sometimes the queen would cook the breakfast for the ship. Sometimes the king would scrub the decks, and even Shirley would help pick the fruit from the plants that they brought and take them to the cooks. And so it was a very jolly first few days, and everybody was so positive and confident and happy because they were leaving a terrible place and going to a better place. However, this is not where the story ends. You see, the night after that there was a terrible storm, a storm like no one had seen before. And you must remember that the king and the queen and the princess and the cooks and the cleaners and the gardeners and the bodyguards and the army men and everybody on the ship, or should I say nobody on the ship, was a sailor, and nobody on the ship was a real captain of the seas, and nobody on the ship had ever been a pirate. So when the storm came, they didn't really know what to do. They should have brought the sails down to stop the wind from blowing the ship over, but they didn't. They should have put everything down under into the ship and tied it down, but they didn't. They should have brought the animals into the ship and tied them up, but they didn't. They didn't know what to do, and so they just held on tight as the water and the waves crashed onto the ship and swayed up and down like a Viking ship. Shirley thought they were going to do like a roller coaster up and down, and even though she wouldn't know what a roller coaster is, you can imagine going up and loop the loop like this on a big wave before the boat crashes down. People were crying. People were being sick. The old chef banged his head against the wooden plank, and there was blood all over the floor. It was terrifying. Then the lightning and thunder and rain pounded down, and the lightning struck the ship's mast, and it cracked in half and fell into the water. Oh my gosh, thought the king. We have no sail. We cannot use the wind to get to the new land. Just then another lightning bolt struck the ship, and the front part snapped off. The queen screamed as she saw water coming into the ship, and the tail go up and the ship head go into the water. Just then another wave crashed down, and the boat broke in half. Just remember, this is in the night time as well, and the clouds had blocked the moon, and there was no light because the rain had put out the candles and the fire that they were using to see. Shirley was in the cabin with her mother, in the bed, holding on tightly, but suddenly the door broke and water came into the cabin and filled it up. The water was cold, and Shirley and her mum swam out into the sea. When they came to the surface, they were going up and down and up and down on the waves, and they could see people and boats, bits of the boats, bits of the ship. They could see some animals floating around, and they could see so many things, all broken or dead or trying to swim for survival. Just then, the shark came and started sniffing around, and it ate Shirley's mum. Shirley didn't know what to do, but she saw a piece of the ship broken, and she jumped onto it so that no shark could get her. Now Shirley was alone, by herself, and the wave was bringing her up and down like a big surfboard, and she had to hold on as tight as she could because she thought if she fell into the water, the sharks were certainly going to eat her up. She closed her eyes as tight as she could, and she held on to the piece of wood with both hands, and she even managed to wrap her leg a little bit around it so she couldn't flip over. She held her eyes so tightly she didn't know where she was. She could just feel the rain hitting her back and beating her on the head. And then I think she passed out or fell asleep. Because when she woke up, she was on the beach with her face in the sand and the waves splashing at her feet. Her eyes opened and were hurting with the shining of the sun right into her eyes. Well, into her left eye, because her other eye was in her face, in the sand. She leaned over and wiped her face clean. And she sat up on the beach and looked around. There was bits of ship. There was boxes. There was clothes and all kinds of things washed up on the beach. She could see a sheep walking around, and she thought it was maybe the sheep from the ship. And then she saw her favourite toy, the parrot, Master, splashing around in the water by her feet, so she picked it up and held it tight and started to walk around the island, looking to see if anybody was alive. But I don't think there were anybody, just Shirley. And then she heard a noise. Caw, caw. And the most beautiful blue and red and green and yellow parrot, a little bit like a toy, but bigger and real, flew down and sat on her shoulder. Hello, parrot. The parrot looked at her and said, Hello. You can talk? Yes, I can talk. My name's Mr. Parrot. Oh my, well, I never, said Shirley. And then both of them started to walk around the island to look for people. The end. Welcome to another When the Lights Go Out. Good evening, my little princesses. Good evening, my little knights. Another day has come and gone, and tomorrow is a new adventure. But now, are you ready for a bedtime story? This story is part 2 of the story of Princess Shirley. Now, do you remember last time? Shirley, the princess, and her mommy and daddy, the king and the queen, were escaping from their castle that was now on fire because of the bad king wanted to take all the land. And do you remember that the king's brother, Shirley's uncle, was a king in another land, and he said, come and live with me and you'll be safe. And so they had to get all their things ready and pack everything into the ship and sail across. But there was a big thunderstorm and the boat broke. Do you remember that? And do you remember that last time we left the story, Shirley was on the beach and she'd woken up having passed out, and she was alone except for a parrot and a sheep and her toy. So let's continue with the story. Once upon a time, Shirley, Princess Shirley, was on the beach, and she'd just met the parrot who could talk. The parrot was called Master, the same as her toy, and so she just called him Master Parrot. And in fact, from there on, she just called him Master. Now, Master and Shirley started to walk along the beach to try and find out if anybody else was still alive. but they couldn't find anyone. Halfway up the beach, they did meet the sheep, and the sheep's name was Polly. So they had two animals, a parrot and a sheep, and Shirley and her toy parrot. So they walked along the beach, and the weather was very nice. It was a little bit warm, and there was a nice breeze of wind blowing across their face. And they saw something in the sand, and then they saw something else, and another one. It was a box, and lots of boxes, lots of wooden boxes that had come off the ship. Shirley ran and opened up the first box, and it was full of rice and bread. And then she opened up another one, and it was full of flour, and another one was full of knives and forks and spoons, and another one had some guns and big swords, and another one had lots of money and gold, and there was about 50 boxes washed up on the beach that were made of wood, so they floated all the way to the beach. There was bits of ship and some clothes and some shoes and all sorts of things. So Shirley, Princess Shirley, started to bring them from the beach out of the water and onto the sand, where she could gather them all up, because she knew that if she was going to survive and not die on the island, she had to get as much of the things out of the water as she could before they floated away again. And so she made a little place just up the beach where the sand met the jungle, and she spent a whole day getting the boxes and all the things. She made sure that the gun that she found, she kept on her in a pocket, and she got enough bullets. And then she made sure that the food was in a nice cool place so it didn't go bad. And she found some fruit, which is quite nice, which is from the ship. So she sat down after about 3 hours and had a little drink and a banana, which is really nice. And she started to ask the parrots about the people on the ship. You see, the parrot had been flying around the island while Shirley was bringing all the boxes up, but Master couldn't see anyone. There was nobody else, no other person on the island apart from Shirley. Now that made Shirley both sad and happy. Happy because she knew that there weren't any crazy killing people that are going to eat her up or tie her up or put her in a tree. But she also felt sad because her mummy and daddy weren't there, and not any of the cleaners or cooks or chefs or anybody that was on the ship. And she started to cry because she knew that she was here all by herself. But she had Master, and she had Polly, and Polly the sheep came and sat down next to her and gave her a big hug, and the parrot gave her a hug and said, "Don't worry, it'll be okay. We'll find your mummy and daddy. I'm sure they're around somewhere. Maybe they're in a different island, or maybe they were picked up by someone else, in a different ship. But we'll find them. Don't you worry. And look at all the food and all the things that we've got here. You will be able to stay here for as long as it takes, maybe 2 months." So Shirley was quite happy now, because she knew that she could at least survive on the island, and she also had a big gun so she could protect herself in case some bad pirates came and tried to take her away. But it was starting to get dark now, and Shirley wanted to go to sleep, but she had nowhere to sleep. And so as quick as she could, the parrot and Polly the sheep and Shirley got some wood and got some leaves and walked into the jungle just a little bit and made a very nice tent. She got some sticks and leaned them against a big tree, and then the parrot Master got all the leaves from the other trees and made it like a green tent. Polly went to get all the dry grass from the other side of the island and brought it back so she could make a nice bed and she'd actually been able to make a blanket from all the leaves. And so that night, Shirley had a very good sleep. There were some bugs and some mosquitoes, but it was okay because the bird ate them and flapped its wings to make sure the bugs went off. And so the sheep and Master took turns to look after Shirley when she was asleep. So like the sheep would stay up for 2 hours, and then Master would stay up for 2 hours, and the sheep would have a sleep, and they took turns looking after this little princess, all alone, on an island, in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of the sea, without her mummy and daddy, and without anybody. And she was on the way to stay with her good uncle, the king, the nice king, while the bad king was trying to chase her and burn down the castle where she lived. But that night, Shirley had a bad dream. She dreamt about the fire in the castle, and she dreamt about the storm and the ship breaking, and she remembered seeing her mum's face screaming as they went into the water. She woke up and was crying, and again the sheep and the parrots, Master and Polly, told her it was going to be okay, and that why don't we have a nice fire so we can make a cup of coffee. And so that's what she did. She got the matches and the lighter from one of the boxes, and then they got the old dry grass from around the island, and she made a little fire in the sand. She made it in the sand because if she made the fire in the jungle, maybe she would burn all the trees down. So to be safe, she just made it in the sand. Once the fire was going, she was able to put some water into a kettle and put the kettle on the fire until it steamed and was boiling hot. Then Master got her a cup, and Polly put some coffee in, but they didn't have any milk, which was fine because she drank the coffee just black, I think. And so anyway, she sat there with a cup of coffee, a nice hot cup of coffee, and thought to herself as she looked out onto the vast blue ocean, what am I going to do here until somebody finds me? I know. I'll go and have a little exploration. I'll go and explore the island. And that's exactly what she did. She picked up the gun after she'd finished the coffee. She packed the big knife and the bag full of snacks and a bottle of water. And so she said to Master, I want to go and explore this island, see what there is. And so Master said, sure, come on then. And so Master sat on Shirley's shoulder, and Shirley and the parrot and the sheep started to go into the jungle. Now, even though Master had flown around to see if there was anybody still alive, because the jungle had so many trees and the leaves were so tightly packed together, Master could not go and fly through the trees and into the jungle. So he said, be careful, because I still don't know if anybody's in here. The parrot had flown around the island and was able to see that nobody was on the beach, and nobody was in the water, and nobody was up on just before you got into the jungle. But the parrot could not see through the trees into the jungle, and so that's why he said, be careful. So Shirley kind of knew this, but she didn't really think about it. And they started to walk into the jungle. She had a knife in one hand and a gun in the other, and enough food to last her for a couple of days, which was a good idea. And they started to walk into the jungle. As they were walking through the jungle, they heard a sound that was a bit scary. It was like... And they stopped. And they looked over the branch and down the hill a little bit, and it was a family of pigs wild pigs with big tusks and horns coming out of their noses. The big daddy pig had really long, sharp tusks and sharp teeth. The mummy wild pig had smaller ones, and there was 3 little baby pigs with tiny, cute ones. And they thought, we can't really go down there. And as they stepped to turn away, a branch broke under the foot of Shirley, and the pigs looked up the hill straight at Shirley and the colourful parrot sitting on her shoulder, and the daddy pig got very angry and his eyes were red, and he screamed, "Arr!" Mummy Pig took the 3 little pigs back into their house, into their little piggy house, and Daddy Pig started to run at Shirley. The parrot shouted, "Run!" And so Shirley started running as fast as her little legs could carry her back to the beach, but the wild pig was just too fast, and he was just about to hit Shirley's bum with his big tusks when the parrot, with all his might and all his power, grabbed Shirley's shoulders and lifted her up just enough. The wild pig missed her and smack bang right into a tree and knocked himself out, and his head was spinning and he was like all over the floor and his legs were kicking. And then the parrot put Shirley back down, and she was still running with her legs, so she like hit the ground running and got back to the beach in about 1 second. Meanwhile, the pig, the wild daddy pig, had gotten back onto his legs, 4 legs, and stumbled, trip, and fell over like 3 times, and then rolled down the hill back to where his house was. Well, Mummy Pig thought this was rather funny, and the 3 baby pigs thought it was very funny to see Daddy with a big bump on his head rolling down the hill back down to where they live, covered in mud and being beaten by a little girl and a parrot. That made the Daddy Pig very angry, but he knew that he had to stay with his family to protect them, so he didn't want to go and chase the girl at the beach. Back down at the beach, Shirley caught her breath because her heart was pounding almost out of her chest, and the parrot told her that they have to get prepared just in case the wild pig ever tries to attack. And so that's what they did. They spent the rest of the time that day gathering sticks and using the knives to sharpen the edges of the sticks, and then sticking them in the ground all around where the fire is and where they sat, and all around where Shirley was sleeping, so that if anything did ever come and try and catch her, they would fall on the spikes or get caught with the spiky sticks and maybe die. And so that's what they did that day. After doing that, Shirley felt quite safe, and the parrot said, "I think that's quite safe." And so they ventured down to the water to find out if they could go swimming and maybe adventure a little bit into the water that way. Shirley had found some goggles, some swimming glasses, in a box, and so she put them on and she dived into the water. The water was crystal clear and very, very blue, and all kinds of sea creatures were there, like little octopuses and little fish and little angelfish and starfish and all these beautiful fish. Now the sheep and the parrot couldn't go into the water because parrots don't swim and sheep don't like getting wet. So she was all alone again, but this time in the water. And she rather liked swimming through the water, and I think maybe that's why she didn't die when the ship broke, is because she could swim very well like a fish. As she was diving down into the water, something shiny caught her eye from the bottom of the water. She swam down and she picked up a little bracelet, a diamond bracelet that she recognized. And then she realized the diamond bracelet was her mummy's bracelet that she was wearing the night that the storm broke. Could this mean that my mummy's disappeared and she's in the water? Or maybe something else, thought Shirley. but she didn't know. However, she took the bracelet and put it on because it was just the right fit, and she never took it off from that day on. And so she came back out of the water and started to make the dinner and thought about what can they do the next day. The end. So, this is the story number 3 in Princess Shirley on the beach, on the island. Once upon a time, Shirley had just come out of the water with her mother's bracelet. She showed it to the sheep and Master Parrot and told them all about her mom and how amazingly brave and beautiful and wonderful she was, and how kind she was all the time. Kind of like as if your mom was Cinderella, how you'd probably imagine her to be a mom. And as they were walking and talking about her mom, and she was showing her the bracelet and telling stories, they went over to where they were making the food, and they sat down and tried to find out and talk about what they would do the next day. Well, I think this was a nice time to talk about it, because they knew that those pigs, the wild pigs, were over the hill and they weren't going to disturb them, and they knew that they had some nice fish to catch in the water, which was really clean. And so they started to make a plan, and the plan was that they would try and be as safe as possible from the weather, from the animals. They had to have enough food, and so they wanted to make a home on the island, but they also had to make a decision to try and get help whenever they could at a minute's notice. So on one hand they had to make their home, but on another hand they had to be ready to leave that home within a second. And so they slept that night, and when they got up in the morning into the nice cool breeze of the morning sunshine and the sound of the slapping waves against the shore, Shirley went for a quick walk by herself. As she was walking, she noticed about all the white rocks that were lying around the beach just up the hill towards the jungle. There was quite a few, and she wondered where they'd come from. And then she got an idea. If she gathered all these rocks that she found, some of them were like an apple size, some of them were a bit bigger, and some of them were quite small. But most of them were probably the size of a watermelon, for example. She thought, if I gather and collect all these white rocks, and if I put them on the beach, which is kind of going down a hill a bit to the water, if I make a word like help or SOS or Shirley, maybe, just maybe, any ships that are traveling way out could look over here, and they could see. And they could see that there's somebody here that's wanting some help. And so that's what she did. She started right away. She picked a place that she thought would be the best place for people to see out to sea. And she gathered all the rocks that she could. And after she gathered a huge pile of white rocks, with the help of Master the Parrot, because he was flying around going, there's one over here, there's one over here. And the sheep was actually trying to dig the sand, and he found quite a few underneath the sand. So it was quite good, because the sheep was helping Shirley find the stones under the sand. And the parrot could fly above the sand and find out where the best places were. And so she had a huge pile of white rocks on the sand. And she thought, what word should I make? I'm here. Well, that might be too many letters. Oh, help me please. Or do I need please? I'm not sure. How about just help? That sounds right, because what else would we do? So anyway, she did that. She spelled out HELP in big capital letters on the beach. And the rocks went almost from where the water was flapping on the sand, right up to where the grass and the greenery started at the jungle. The letters were bigger than Shirley. I mean, I think the H was about 5 times bigger than Shirley, and then the E and the L and the P were hugely spread out across the beach. Shirley had an idea. After she'd finished, she was quite hot, so she decided to go for a swim. And being a very good swimmer, she swam right out, about a mile out to sea. And there she stopped, and she turned around back at the island and kind of kicked her feet and pushed her hands down and lifted herself out of the water as much as possible. And she could see the word help very, very clearly. Actually, the E in help was the wrong way round, she thought. Oh my gosh, but she couldn't see that from the beach because it was so close and so big. So anyway, she swam all the way back, and they changed the E to the right way round, and she was quite happy now that if any ships ever came near, close enough to see the island, they would of course see the word help. Then the sheep said, "What happens if they come past the other side of the island?" "Oh, you're right. There's the other side of the island that they might go past and not see this side. So they had to make a decision, because now they had all the stones on one side of the island, making a big help sign, and then nothing on the other side. Well, that's what they decided. They thought that they would have a fire ready to go on one side and help on the other. And so if Master the Parrot, or even the sheep, or even Shirley, saw that there was a ship on the other side where there was no help, they would just light the fire, and the ship would probably see the fire. And that way, they've got something on each side of the island that will tell the sailors where she is. And so they spent the next day gathering all the sticks and all the dry leaves and dry bits of grass and getting everything ready so that if there was a ship sailing right out to sea on one side, they could run and light the fire and it would be smoking in seconds. Or they could just hope that the ship would see the help sign on the other side of the island. It was quite good. And so I think Shirley felt very happy now, or happier, and a bit comfortable, because she'd done all that she could do to let people know that she was there. She didn't have a phone, she didn't have an email, she couldn't swim all the way back to anywhere, and so she felt satisfied that she'd done what she could, and now it was just up to her to do other things that she could do and not worry too much about waiting for somebody to rescue her. So she got on with it, and she started to make a house and make a home and make a place for the food, like a kitchen, and make a place for the toilet, like a bathroom, and then make a place for taking a rest, like a living room, and then going to make a place where you sleep, like a bedroom. Instead of having one place where you do all those things, well, maybe not take a poop, but having different places, whereas she did first have one place because she thought, I'm just be here a few days. Now she got it in her mind that she might be there for a very, very long time, and so she thought, if I'm going to be here for like a year or two or even longer, I'm going to make this island my home. It's my house now. And that's exactly what she did. She started to build the kitchen, like I said, and it was going to be a very nice kitchen because she had lots of nice and healthy food and had a big, nice fire. She'd taken 3 of the stones out of the P for help and 3 of the stones out of the L, and so that it made the words a little bit shorter, but she did swim out to the sea to make sure that it was still visible, and she did see it very, very well. So she thought, if I just take a couple of stones from these letters to make the fire on the beach, it's going to be okay. And that's exactly what she did. She was quite smart, this Shirley, and she got used to living on the island very, very quickly. And I think it's because of being the daughter of a king and a queen. And of course, to become the king and queen is not something easy to do, to become a king and a queen of a country, is it? And so, if you're the daughter of a king and a queen, well, then you're pretty special anyway. And Shirley was very, very special. And she also had the parrot and the sheep to help her. And the sheep was always woolly and kind and fluffy and really wanting to snuggle up. And the parrot was very wise and sharp and liked to fly around and check out that everything was nice and safe. And so Shirley felt quite comfortable now and less afraid of the future, because she was building a home. She'd done what she could to be rescued, and she had she had animals or friends who were looking out for her, and she was working hard to live her life, to make it something special, even though she was on an island by herself. And so that's where we're at with this story. We're quite comfortable now that she's staying away from those wild boars, and she's made her home and she's building it bit by bit, because she's only one person, and the parrot can't carry big bits of wood, and neither can the sheep. I mean, it would be nice if there was a monkey, but there's no monkey there, because the monkey could carry things and climb up trees and stuff. The parrot can fly into trees, but he can't climb up trees. And of course, the sheep can't do much really. It can dig a little bit, and it can push a little bit, and that's about it. It could make some grass flat. In fact, it was a sheep that was able to make Shirley's bed so nice and flat and soft by rolling around in the grass for like half an hour, and it made the floor so flat. It was unbelievable. Now Shirley was worried that this island was going to get cold in the winter time, because where she came from, they did have winters, and they had snow, and then they had spring, and then they had summer, which was quite hot like it was on the island just then. And then they were gone to fall and then winter. And she was a bit worried that it might get really cold on the island, and she wished she had a very sharp knife so that she could shave the sheep and have its wool. And then she remembered she did have a big sharp knife. In fact, there were several boxes that she had not opened yet, and she remembers that one of them was clanking around, like it sounded like it's got full of knives and scissors and stuff, when she was moving them onto the beach. She ran across and opened it quite quickly, and there inside was a beautiful pair of golden scissors, as sharp as could be. And that made her feel better, because she knew. And she did ask the sheep. She did say to the sheep, if it gets cold here, I'm going to cut your fur off and use it as a jacket. And the sheep was like, yeah, I don't mind, as long as you let me have a bit. And in fact, my hair will grow back. I've got a jacket that will just grow back. And so they had a quick, sudden idea. If we let the weather get so cold that I need to cut all your fur off, to cut all your wool off to get me warm, then you're going to be cold, because we'll just have one jacket between two. And here is a very good idea. They said, why don't we cut off your wool now when we don't need it, and so it will grow back, and that when it gets cold, I can wear this one and you have your own. And in fact, if it doesn't get cold for a while, when it grows back, we'll cut it off again so that the parrot has one, and we can all wear sheep's wool if it gets cold. Well, that was just a brilliant idea, and it was quite funny, because that's what they did, exactly that. Shirley took these beautiful gold sharp scissors and started to trim the sheep. Well, the parrot could not stop laughing, because he'd never seen an animal losing all its fur or whatever, and it could not believe it And it said, if I had to pluck out all my feathers, I'm sure they would not grow back. I would just look like a chicken that's been roasted in a fire. And they had such a funny time laughing over that. And when they'd finished, there was a nice big ball of wool, as big as Shirley, and the sheep looked rather silly, like a shaved-headed old man with wrinkly belly and all that kind of stuff. And they just had a cup of coffee and relaxed, because the last few days had been very, very good. They'd had a fight with the wild boars. They found the mum's bracelet. They'd started building a house. They'd put the help on one side. They'd made a fire on the other side. And now they were getting ready for winter, if there even was one. Whatever next? The end. Good evening, my little princesses. Are you ready for bed? Are you ready for a bedtime story? So, once upon a time, there was a princess called Shirley, and she was trapped on an island. But not trapped like trapped in a trap, or trapped under something, or trapped inside a house, or trapped in a car. She was trapped on an island, which means she was free to go anywhere on the island, and she could try and swim away if she wanted to escape. But, of course, she couldn't, because she didn't know how far she had to swim, and she didn't have a boat or any way to get off the island. So we'd say she was trapped on the island. However, it's not all as it seems. It's not so terrible after all, because do you remember when they had finished a long meal, and they'd had a nice few days, and they'd just finished shaving the sheep, and they had all this wool ready for if it became cold. And so, as I said before, they were starting to enjoy living on the island, and they were living very nice. They had lots of food that they'd got from the boxes off the ship. They got lots of fresh fruit and vegetables that they were picking around the jungle. They always remembered not to go down the hill into the jungle because of the scary wild pigs. But they were quite happy with what they've got. They never went hungry, and they always had something nice to eat. The bird, the parrot, Mr. Master, sometimes would find really exotic fruit from far away on the island. Of course, this is somewhere that Shirley couldn't go, because he sometimes found the really magical fruit on top of the mountain that was in the island, right at the top of the tree. The sheep couldn't even dream of getting the fruit from there, so that's another reason why Shirley really loved Master, because he could go to places that nobody else could, and he could fly and see everything from above. And Shirley, well, she could go into the beach and into the sea and swim down and see everything from there. And I guess the sheep could walk around and push a few things and make some grass flats, so he was quite happy anyway. And now that he'd been shaved and was lighter and cleaner than before, he could run around faster and everything. He was quite liked it. And so they were living very happily on this island, and time passed, and day by day they passed. And then one day, as they were eating their breakfast, the sheep looked up, and it was a very crystal clear blue sky and beautiful sunny morning with a slight breeze and very clean air. The sheep spotted what he thought was a ship. It was ever so tiny little prick, far out to sea. He had to blink a few times because he wasn't sure, and he rubbed his eyes and was like, "Hey, guys, is that a ship?" Well, they both turned around, Shirley and Parrot, and Shirley rubbed her eyes too and had to look quite a while. "I think it is a ship." Master immediately flew up into the sky, and he tried to fly just a bit closer and a bit higher so he could see. Sure enough, It was a ship, and the ship had white sails, so we knew it wasn't a pirate ship. It was coming along the side of the island, which had the fire on it. Do you remember? On one side was the big help, and on the other side was the dried wood and all the things ready for the fire. It was really far out, but the three of them immediately left the breakfast, ran to the other side of the island, and started to light the fire. They tried to light it, but it wouldn't work, and so Shirley had to run back to the other boxes and try and find a lighter or something. She did, and by the time she got back, the master and the sheep were waiting for her to start the fire. She lit one of the pieces of dry grass, and it was in flames in a second, and all the wood was burning, and they had to jump back because it was so hot. They had to walk back a little bit, and they stood up on the hill just before going into the jungle and watched as the flames grew higher and higher, and the smoke went white. And then Parrot had an idea. Why don't we put a little bit of green grass on it, and it'll make the smoke all black, and maybe the ship can see us then. And so that's what they did very quickly. They went and gathered all the low-lying branches from the trees and all the bits of grass that they could, and they threw it on the fire. And just as Parrot had said, the smoke turned darker and darker and darker. And they knew then that if there was a chance that they could be rescued, it surely was this. And if there was a chance that somebody on that ship far, far out to sea was going to just turn their body and look in this direction, I'm sure that they would be able to see the smoke and then come and collect and rescue Shirley, Princess Shirley, whose mommy and daddy had disappeared and probably drowned, whose home, the castle, was probably burnt to the ground, who didn't have a country to go to anymore, and whose uncle was waiting for her. But she was trapped on an island. The three of them stood there, fixed with their eyes on this ship, the tiny little dots on the horizon, and they were looking at it for so long and with so much intensity that their eyes started to hurt, and the ship started to blur in their eyes, and they couldn't focus anymore, and the sun got brighter and brighter, and it just got impossible for all of them to keep looking at the ship all this time. They knew that the ship was so far away that even moving a little millimeter on the horizon was going to take a few minutes, and for the ship to move a little centimeter or two on the horizon was going to take about an hour. So they decided just to take a little bit of a rest, and to make sure that the fire was still burning and that the smoke was still bellowing from the fire. And that's what they did. They took turns. First of all, Master Parrot would keep look at the ship to make sure that it wasn't going away, and the other two, Shirley and the sheep, would get the grass and the wood to keep the fire going. And then they both run up the hill, and then Parrot and sheep would go and gather the grass and the wood, and they would come up the hill, and then Shirley and the parrot, and so on and so forth, until they would keep taking turns and keep looking. And they had quite a good system going on, and they did this for about 5 hours. Would you believe it? It took them all the way until after lunch. They did not have any thought of eating any lunch, because how could they? How could they give up this chance to be rescued to have some lunch? They could have lunch whenever they wanted. They were not going to give up on this. And they knew that if they kept the fire going, and if one of the people on that ship turned around and saw, then they would be rescued. But if they went back and had their lunch because they felt either hungry or that it's lunchtime, then they knew for 100% that the fire would probably go out. that the smoke would probably stop, and that any chance of anyone on any ship turning around to see any smoke to rescue any little princess, well, that would just be zero. And so it was an easy decision not to have lunch at lunchtime and to focus on being rescued. And so they kept it up for another 2 hours, and then another 3 hours, and then, as they had secretly been dreading, and they knew deep down that this moment would come if the ship didn't spot them, it started to get dark. And now this presented an even bigger problem, but an even bigger opportunity. Because of course, in the daylight, it's hard to see the fire, and it's easy to see the smoke. But at night time, it's very hard to see black smoke in a black sky, but it's very, very easy to see a shining, strong flame in the black sky. And so they put more and more wood on it. They didn't really care about the smoke anymore. They wanted to make the flames and fire as big as possible. And they got all the dry wood that they'd collected in the hopes that somebody on that ship would turn around and spot the fire. They were starting to get very, very hungry now, and it was in the evening, and it should have been dinner time, and it should have been lunchtime. And they'd left the breakfast on the beach to go and start the fire in the morning. So they had not had any food at all, and they'd been working non-stop up and down the beach, getting the wood and the fire ready, and then looking with such intensity that their eyes would hurt. And then they'd go and build the fire again, and if the wind blew the smoke into their face, their eyes would sting, and all three of them now had very, very red eyes. They had very, very aching arms and legs and muscles and scratches and cuts, and on top of this they were all very, very hungry. And slowly, bit by bit, they began to lose hope. They began to give up. They began to slow down. And eventually, the ship that was a tiny, tiny dot on the horizon in the sea slowly disappeared. And then it was dark, and they didn't know what to do. Should they continue to build the fire in the dark? Should they give up and go and get some food? What should they do? Well, it was well into the midnight now, and I think it was Shirley that said that they should stop, because she thought they'd been doing it now for more than 12 hours, and if the person on the ship had not seen them in the 12 hours, then the chances that they would just turn around now and have a look when it's so dark, when they're probably all asleep, when we should be asleep, the chances of that are probably pretty low, like zero. And so she thought, why don't we just save the rest of the wood to the next time? Save the rest of the grass and the greeneries until next time. Let's save ourselves and our bodies for next time, because if we keep going, and if we keep working as hard as this in the middle of the night, with no breakfast and no lunch and no dinner, what state are we going to be in tomorrow if another ship is on the horizon? And so the parrots and the sheep agreed, and in the dark, with no lights except the flickering of the old fire burning down, they went to get their breakfast off the other side of the beach, and they brought it back with some nice hot coffee and some food from the boxes, and they sat there around the fire, almost like a campfire, as it slowly faded away. The flames got lower and lower, and the heat got lower and lower, until they'd finished their dinner and they'd finished their coffee, and the fire went out. It was pitch black now, and Shirley, the princess, Master the parrot, and Polly the sheep walked back to their house that they'd made, had a wash because they were black as soot. Their face was black because of the smoke. Their hands and feet were filthy because of ratching around for the wood. And they were cut and scratched. And so they cleaned themselves up and they brushed their teeth and they got ready for bed. And they went to sleep. And they all needed a very good night's sleep because they were tired. And they were not only tired because they'd worked so hard. They were tired because they'd hoped so hard. They'd hoped so much. They'd wanted to be rescued. And they'd stared and they'd focused and they'd looked at the ship for so long. And they'd imagined somebody, just somebody, even a little boy or a little girl or somebody on the ship. They hoped that they would just turn around and see them, or see the smoke, or see the fire, and come and rescue them. But they didn't. And so not only were they tired, but they were hopeless. Although saying that, they were full, and they'd had a day of working hard to do the best they could. They knew that they couldn't do any more. They knew that they couldn't have made the fire bigger or louder or smoke darker. They knew that they couldn't have worked better as a team. And they knew they couldn't have kept going and going and going because that's sometimes impossible. And so even though they were still on the island, they knew that they still had a home. They still had food. And they still had each other. And because of this, they still had hope. And so they went to sleep, slightly unhappy, but hopeful that they could do something the next time. The next day was just the same as the day before, except there were no ships. And they made a note to themselves, and they made a promise that every morning when they woke up, they would check on each side of the island to see if there was a ship. And that made them more hopeful. And then they went back to where the fire had been to start to build another one to get ready for the next time. And they were amazed because where the fire had been, when they cleaned away the sand, the heat from the fire had made a huge, beautiful, sparkling diamond. The fire had melted the sand into the most beautiful diamond you'd ever seen. And so they picked it out and cleaned it up and put it in their living room as a reminder that even though some things get fiery hot and burn down, it's not the end of the world, and there's still hope. And sometimes, under all that dirt and burnt things away, you can clean away to find a shiny diamond. The end. Good evening, my two little princesses. Are you ready for bed? Are you ready for Daddy's bedtime story? Well, this story is the final one in Princess Shirley and the Island with Master the Parrot and Polly the Sheep. So if you remember last time, Shirley had an encounter with the pirates, and with the help of the wild pigs, she chased them away, and with the help of Master the Parrot, who carried them all and dropped them onto the ship, she was able to get rid of the pirates and make friends with the wild pigs, and also end up with the boats from the ships that the pirates sailed onto the island with. And so now you have an island which is ready to be rescued, because on one side they've got a big help, and on the other side they've set up the fire one more time, the third time, so that if any other ships go past, they can call for help. And you see, now that they'd called for help and a ship had actually came, and it was a pirate ship, they were a bit scared that next time they called there might be another pirate ship, and what are they going to do? Do they have to get ready to fight the next ship if something comes to the beach? So the wild pigs and Master and Polly and Shirley now used to meet every single day to talk about the plans of what they could do if some more pirates came. And they started to take a long time to make all the traps and all the sharp like sticks and everything, and all the places that they could go to if there was another lot of pirates. Last time there was 2 boats of pirates, but they still managed to kick them off the island. What happens if there's hundreds of boats come? They can't surely protect the island from that many pirates. So they thought that one day they have to get off the island seriously. And every day they made the island a bit more secure and a bit safer, and they made more traps, and they made it sure that if there were pirates come to get them, they'd have a very, very good chance of surviving. However, day by day, week by week, month by month, Shirley knew that she had to get off the island, even though she'd been making a home, and even though it was probably the safest, most protected island in the whole wide world, and even though she could be attacked by hundreds of pirates, and still a little girl with a little sheep and a parrot and a family of wild pigs could probably get rid of about 200 strong, crazy men. And so, even though she knew that she had to escape, and the day came when she did want to escape. It came the day after a very terrible storm, and the terrible storm had broken the rocks that said help and washed them all into the sea. And on the other side of the island, it had broken all the fire trees that were ready to send a message. And it broke her house, and it broke all the traps and everything that they'd made over the last year to protect themselves from the pirates. In short, the island was devastated. Luckily, the 2 boats that the pirates had come on before were safe, because just after the pirates had come onto the shore and got kicked out, Shirley knew that she had to keep the boats, so she brought them into the jungle and turned them upside down so that they wouldn't get broken. And those were the things, actually, that they had to hide under when the storm came. You see, the storm was very, very fierce, and the lightning and thunder was cracking and breaking trees and everything, and the family of pigs and Shirley and the parrot and Polly the sheep hid under one of the boats all night long. They couldn't sleep because of the noise of the wind and the rain and the lightning and the flashes and the water that was coming under the boats. And so the next day when the sun came up and the lightning and everything had stopped and the clouds had parted and there was a beautiful blue sky, they walked up and looked at all the devastation and all the broken things, and they decided that the next day would be the day they left. So they spent the whole day gathering all the things that they could take, gathering all the things that weren't broken, gathering all the things that they needed to bring with them on the journey to try and get to their uncle's house, the king, the nice king in the nice land, far away from the horrible guy that burnt down her old castle, far away from the reason that her mommy and daddy are probably at the bottom of the ocean. And as they were gathering things, they found the knives and some guns and some food and some clothes, and then they pulled the boats up back onto the island and tied them in the water so that they wouldn't float away that night. And then they made the final fire, and they sat around the fire and talked about all the good things that they'd done, all the adventures, all the things that they'd made, and the storm that they'd have survived, and talked about the pirates. And then they started to talk about what they were going to do when they finally found the nice king's land, and all the good things that they would do and where they would go. And Princess Shirley told Parrot and Polly and the pigs, because the pigs were going to come as well, all about the things that they could do, all the food that they could eat, and all the places that they could go that you cannot go to when you're stuck on an island. And they watched the fire slowly burn and go quiet, and then it was dark, and they fell asleep. Although Shirley didn't really sleep much, because she knew the next day is when they were going to leave the island and travel on the sea in the boats and risk everything to get back. The next day they woke up very early and packed the boats really quickly, and they turned around and said goodbye to the island. And Shirley bent down and picked up some sand from the beach and put it in a pocket. That was going to be the memory of where they lived for a very long time. They jumped into the boats and started to paddle. They paddled the boats all the way out. They didn't have a clue which way they were going, and so they just picked one way, and it was the way that the wind was blowing, so that the wind could blow the boat along and they could take some rests from paddling the boat. They knew that if they paddled and paddled, they would get to some place, and they just hoped that they weren't going back to the burnt down castle where Shirley was escaping from. So that's what they did. They rowed and rowed and rowed, and as they were rowing, sometimes the big daddy pig would row, sometimes Polly would row, but most of the time Shirley would row. Master Parrot could not row because he's just a parrot, and he couldn't row with his wings, or he might damage them, break his feathers. However, what Master Parrot could do was fly up into the sky as high as he could fly, and with his very good parrot eyes could see if there was any land coming up, and he could see if they were going back to the terrible place where Shirley escaped from, or they were going to the nice Uncle King's place. They rowed and rowed and rowed, and when it got dark, they took turns in sleeping and rowing, and sleeping and rowing, and then they shared all the food very, very well. And after 3 days in the sea, Parrot spotted the land. He was very far out, and so Shirley asked him, "Does it have a burnt castle? And does it look like this? And does it look like that? Because that's where I came from." And it did not look like that. So they knew at least they weren't going back to the terrible place where they escaped from. And she'd never been to the uncle's place before in this new, nice land. She'd only heard the stories about the purple castle and the little mountains all around. And so she said to the parrot as they got closer, "Next time you fly up, can you see? Tell me what colour the castle is." And he flew back down. He said, "It's a purple castle." And so they knew that they were going to the nice place. And so that's what made them row faster and faster, and they kept rowing without stop. They made sure to drink enough water, and they had just enough food left to get them there. The next day they arrived onto the beach, and out came lots of soldiers. They marched down to the beach with their big swords and guns and everything, and Shirley quickly explained to them who she was and what had happened and why she was there, and how it had been such a long time since anybody had heard from her, and she told them to go and tell the king, and that's what they did. They brought Shirley and the pigs and the parrot and the sheep up to the purple castle to meet the king, her uncle. Her uncle, who had heard all the story before she arrived, ran outside with the queen to meet Shirley and give her such a big hug. And she said, "Come with me, young princess." And the king, her uncle, took Shirley all the way back to where the king was living, and he opened the big door, and there, inside the living room of the castle, was Shirley's mom, and Shirley's dad, and her auntie. They were all alive. That's right. Shirley ran and gave her mommy and daddy such a big hug, and mommy and daddy were crying because they thought Shirley was dead, and Shirley thought mommy and daddy were dead, but they were alive. What had happened was the mom and dad had drifted to another island and managed to escape back to the uncle's country. But Shirley, well, they thought she was dead and gone under the water, but she wasn't. And so they were so happy to be reunited finally. And that is the end of the story of how Shirley got off the island, and they lived happily ever after. The end.